Good morning, boys and girls. I'm glad to be with you this morning. My name is Margaret, and I'll be reading for you today. I'm so glad you could be with us. I'm going to read two books this morning about Otis the tractor, and this is a little stuffed version of Otis the tractor. And he's the farmer's very favorite helper. Okay, the first book is just Otis, and the book Otis has been around for about 10 years, and I just became familiar with it recently. But I'm going to go ahead and read now about Otis the tractor. There was once a friendly little tractor named Otis. Every day, he and his farmer worked together, taking care of the farm. There's a lot of work to do on a farm. Otis liked his work, but after a hard day, he was ready to play. He would ride the rolling hills and skirt the mud pond. He would leapfrog bales of hay and explode through the haystack. Woo! He would play ring around the rosy with the ducks until he was very tired. Then he would sit beneath the apple tree and watch the farm below until he was sleepy. And every night, tired but happy, Otis would puff into his little stall in the barn. One night, Otis was fast asleep, and the farmer brought a beautiful calf into the barn. The calf bawled for her mother, but when the sleepy sound of Otis puff, putty chuff, put, putty chuff, came from the next stall, the scared little calf drifted off to sleep right beside Otis. From that day on, the calf followed the little tractor everywhere he went. Put, puff, putty chuff. She followed him over the rolling hills and down to the mud pond. She was right behind him, leapfrogging bales of hay. And the calf made the games of Ring Around the Rosie all the better. Calf's right in the middle. At the end of the day, they would sit beneath the apple tree and watch the farm below. Otis loved his little calf, and the little calf loved Otis. But the little calf didn't like the big yellow tractor and his deep rumbling snore. There was no one to purr the little calf gently to sleep, no one to spend her days with. And Otis could not even see his farm. His friend often sat with him, but she could not get him to play like in the old days. I guess Otis got too old to do the job on the farm. One hot summer day, the little calf wandered down to the mud pond just to cool off. When she waded into the muddy water, her feet sank, and with every step she sank deeper and deeper and deeper into the mud. The little calf was stuck. All the farm hands came running with their ropes, but the more they tugged, the more stuck she got. "Get the big yellow tractor," the farmer shouted. "He can save her." But the big tractor just scared the little calf, and she sank deeper and deeper into the mud. "Call Fire Chief Douglas," said the farmer. "He can save our little calf." But the sight of the big red truck startled the little calf even deeper. The farmer was fit to be tied. Who could save his little calf? You know who's not around? Suddenly, the little calf's ears perked up. She heard, over the hum of the growing crowd, there came a sound in the distance. A soft, rhythmic purr, put, puff, chut, puff, putty, chuff. The sound became louder, and all at once, Otis puffed from around the barn and headed straight toward Mud Pond. Otis puffed right up next to the muddy water's edge. The calf was happy to see her friend. She bawled. It was something like a hello. And then, to the amazement of the crowd, Otis slowly began to circle the pond. He circled the pond, and the little calf started circling the pond too. She started walking around, and her eyes following Otis. He circled and circled, and the little calf turned and turned, never taking her eyes off the tractor. With each circle Otis made around the mud pond, the muddy grip loosened until the calf was able to stumble free all on her own. The two friends had found each other again. Otis led the calf and everyone in a happy parade. "What a special tractor," said the farmer. Otis had surely saved the day. From that day on, the farmer discovered that with Otis's puttering purr nearby, his chickens laid more eggs and the cows produced more milk. And at the end of the day, Otis and his special friend would play until they grew tired. Then they would sit together under the apple tree and watch the farm below. They look happy. All right. Otis had other friends on the farm. And this next story is Otis and the Kittens. Burn it up. This is called Otis and the Kittens. It was hot and dry on the farm where the friendly little tractor named Otis lived. Otis couldn't remember the last time it had rained. Farmers all over the valley grew more and more anxious by the day. Water was in short supply, and the ground was hard, and the corn stalks were dry, and they were only half as tall as they should be. Otis spent his afternoons out in the sweltering fields with the farm hands, baling hay. Now the bales of hay, they use the hay in the winter to feed the cows when there's no green grass. Once the load was full, with a puff and a chuff, Otis would pull the wagon into the barn down by the bend at Mud Creek. The farm hands would use a pulley to lift each bale up into the loft where it would be stored for the long winter to come. When the sun had gone over the hills and work was done, Otis was ready to sit in the shade and rest. But not Otis's friend the bull. The bull liked to stand in front of Otis and snort and snarl and huff hot air. 2 snorts, a snarl, and a huff. All the animals knew what that meant. The bull was challenging Otis to a tug of war. Otis smiled. His friends were always eager to play, even after a long day of work. One duck wound the end of a rope around the bull's horns, and another duck looped the other end around Otis's steering wheel. The animals then took sides, grabbing on any way they could. Everyone pulled and tugged with all their might. Have you ever played tug of war, where you and some other friends are on one side and another group of friends on the other side, and you each pull to see if you can pull the other group down? It's a lot of fun. Eventually, Otis would ease up a little. He didn't care much about winning. He just liked having fun with his friends. One afternoon, when everyone was up under the shade of the apple tree, Otis spotted something moving down in the field. It looked to be an orange tabby cat. You can barely see it in the picture right there. He watched as she ran toward the old barn, and there he saw something else that caused his engine to sputter. It was a swirl of smoke coming from the barn. We had a barn when I was a little girl, and it caught on fire and burned, and it was very scary. Otis raced to the barn, with the animals following behind. They discovered flames coming from the loft. Inside the old barn, a fire! A fire! The barn was filled with brittle, dry straw, and Otis knew it wouldn't take long for it to burst into flames. Just then the tabby cat appeared in the barn window. With a putt, puff, putty chuff, Otis rushed into the burning barn. Inside, the flames were growing, and smoke was forming a dark cloud. Now, you should never do what Otis did, run into a building that is on fire. That's very dangerous. You wait to get help. The cat was pacing back and forth high above the rafter. She's right here. And she's scared and she's looking for something. What do you think she might be looking for? Otis chuffed for her to jump down, but the cat wouldn't budge. Instead, she stared down at Otis and belted out the loudest meow Otis had ever heard. What was she trying to tell him? What do you think she's trying to say? Look. Suddenly, Otis heard a tiny meow from the hayloft, and then another tiny meow, and another, and another, and another. At once, there were 5 little furry heads popped up and stared down at him. Kittens! As flames blazed overhead, Otis stood on his hind wheels and stretched to the edge of the loft to a chorus of tiny meows, one by one. Meow, 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 meow. The kittens hopped down, and the farm animals cheered as Otis emerged from the burning barn with kittens all over him. But as soon as Mama Cat counted the little heads, she meowed frantically. Back at the barn, this time Otis had no doubt what she was saying. How many more were still in there? He wondered. By then, the top of the barn was engulfed in flames, sending large plumes of smoke into the sky. Otis was afraid, but he gunned his engine, screeched his tires, and dashed back into the burning barn. One little kitten left. Inside, the heat was growing worse. It was hard to breathe. Otis revved his engine, and one last little kitten popped up, trembling from fear. Otis puffed a gentle chuff-chuff, and the kitten climbed down on top of Otis's engine and hopped onto his seat and leapt down onto the floor and scampered out of the barn to safety. Outside, the animals cheered when they saw another kitten come out, and they watched for Otis to follow. Inside, the flames had spread by the second. Otis wheeled around to see if any more kittens were in the barn. The old boards of the barn's floor creaked, buckled, and moaned. The walls popped. He couldn't wait another second. Just as Otis spotted the exit and raced his wheels to leave, there was a giant crash. The floor fell in, and Otis plunged to the darkness below. Outside, the animals held their breath, waiting for their friend to come out. Otis couldn't move. He had fallen into the cluttered lower level of the barn, and he was covered in dust and debris and boards. Stuck in the hole, with the fire raging above, Otis could hardly puff a breath. Then he heard the siren of Fire Chief Douglas and the fire engine. The farmer pulled up and Otis heard him rounding up the animals. Help had arrived. He knew he'd be fine until he heard Fire Engine Douglas holler. "Sorry, farmer, the creek's gone dry, and the drought, and the water supply's too low to save this old barn. As long as everyone's safe, we'll just have to let her burn." Underneath a pile of broken boards and dust, Otis couldn't see a thing or move a gasket, and his heart sank deep inside his engine. The fire chief had said there was no hope on saving the barn, but the farmer knew that Otis was inside. The animals had gone wild with fear. The farmer counted them one by one. They were all safe and sound. He couldn't figure out why they were acting so crazy. Suddenly, the little calf bolted for the barn door. Her friends followed right behind. How could they ever get Otis out of the barn? Otis was stuck in the hole, covered in dust and planks. The bull looked up at the rafters and down at Otis. He stood in front of the hole in the floor and snorted and snarled and huffed hot air. 2 snorts, a snarl, and a huff. The animals knew just what that meant. One duck grabbed the pulley rope and wound it around the bull's horns. Another duck flew into the hole and hooked it to Otis's steering wheel. The bull snorted and tugged and pulled, but Otis wouldn't budge. The horse and the cow grabbed the rope behind the bull, and together they snorted and tugged and neighed and mooed and pulled. And Otis teetered ever so slightly. The little calf jumped in, tugged and bawled and pulled, and Otis raised a little bit more. The puppy grabbed the rope behind the little calf, and with a fierce "Rrr," he tugged and pulled and growled as Otis inched upward. And then came a piercing meow and the sound of Fire Chief Douglas shouting, "Holy moly, Otis is in there. Hold on tight, everyone, I'm here to help." So the fire chief grabbed onto the rope and helped the animals pull. Altogether, the animals and Fire Chief Douglas lifted Otis higher and higher out of the barn. The ducks swooped in and pushed him over the edge of the opening to where they could lower him to the floor. Together, everyone pulled the dust and the ash-covered tractor from the burning fire, just as parts of the barn began to fall. Then Fire Chief Douglas and his men hosed off Otis and wiped down his frame. The cool water revived Otis, and everyone cheered when they heard a faint put, puff, putty, chuff. It was music to their ears. The kittens jumped up on top of Otis and crawled all over him. Fire Chief Douglas laughed and said, "Farmer, what do you say we adopt these kittens and their mama? They'd make a mighty fine addition to our firehouse family." Otis puffed a happy chuff. He couldn't think of a better home for his new friends than the firehouse. So the mama and all the kittens were moving to the firehouse. Otis helped them, and they helped him back. That's what we should do, help one another. Okay, we have time for one more little story, so I'm going to read. This one's totally different. Sheila Ray, The Brave. It's by Kevin Hinks. He's written lots of children's books. Everybody knows somebody like Sheila Ray. Sheila Ray wasn't afraid of anything. She wasn't afraid of the dark. She wasn't afraid of thunder and lightning. And she wasn't afraid of the big black dog either at the end of the block. At dinner, Sheila Ray made believe that the cherries in her fruit cocktail were the eyes of dead bears, and she ate 5 of them. At school, Sheila Ray giggled when the principal walked by, and when her classmate Wendell stole her jump rope during recess, Sheila Ray tied him up until the bell rang. "I'm very brave," said Sheila Ray, patting herself on the back. Sheila Ray stepped on every crack on the sidewalk without fear. And when her sister Louise said there was a monster in the closet, Sheila Ray attacked that monster. And she rode her bicycle with no hands and her eyes closed. "Yay, yay, Sheila Ray," her friends yelled, clapping their hands. One day, Sheila Ray decided to walk home from school a new way. Louise was afraid to. "You're too brave for me," Louise said. "You're always such a scaredy cat," Sheila Ray called. "I'm not," whispered Louise. Sheila Ray started off skipping. "I am brave," she sang. "I am fearless." She stepped on every crack. She walked backwards with her eyes closed. She growled at a stray dog and bared her teeth at the stray cats. She pretended that the trees were evil creatures. She climbed up and broke their fingers off. Snap, snap, snap. Sheila Ray walked and walked and walked. She turned corners. She crossed the street. It suddenly occurred to Sheila Ray that nothing looked familiar to her anymore. Sheila Ray heard some frightening noises. They sounded worse than thunder. She thought horrible thoughts. They were worse than anything she had ever imagined. "I am brave," Sheila Ray tried to convince herself. "I am fearless." The sounds became more frightening. The thoughts became more horrible. Sheila Ray sat down on a rock and cried. "Help! Help!" she sniffed. She thought of her mother and father and Louise. "Mother, Father, Louise!" she cried. "Here I am," a voice said. "Louise!" Sheila Ray hugged her sister. "We're lost," Sheila Ray said. "No, we're not," said Louise. "I know the way home. Follow me." Louise stepped on every crack. She walked backwards with her eyes closed. She growled at stray dogs and bared her teeth at stray cats. And she pretended that the trees were evil creatures. She jumped up and broke their fingers off. Snap, snap, snap. Sheila Ray walked quietly behind her. They walked and walked. They crossed streets and they turned corners. Soon their house could be seen between the trees. Sheila Ray grabbed Louise and dashed up the street. When they reached their own yard and the gate was closed behind them, Sheila Ray said, "Louise, you are brave and you are fearless." "We both are," said Louise, and they walked backwards into the house with their eyes closed. Thank you for being such good listeners today, and we will see you again next Friday.